Hello, and welcome to Module 2, Lesson 2 of the Astrology 101 crash course. In this one, we'll be covering magicians, witches, and astrology mentioned in the Bible, featuring a very special guest, Don Golden. Hello, Don. Welcome to this recording.
Hi, Melanie. Good to be with you.
So, for those of you who don't know who Don Golden is, he is the founder of Just Capital Quotient and leader of the JCQ Infinity Investors Club. He co-authored Jesus Wants to Save Christians with Rob Bell. He's also an ordained pastor at the historic Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore, and he received a Master's of Philosophy from the University of Wales. So clearly, this is a man who really knows what he's talking about. So thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today.
My pleasure, and thanks for that warm introduction.
So we're going to begin right now with the Magi visiting the Messiah. It is, again, underknown fact in the Bible. And I just wanted you to jump into your understanding of this passage.
Yeah. Well, Melanie, thank you again. To me, what's so cool about this is in traditional Christian contexts, there are few things more forbidden to Christians than astrology and the occult and the hidden arts and ancient practices that would fall under those rubrics. But what's so amazing is the very beginning of the gospel story begins with astrologers, the word magi, magicians. They are used by God to proclaim the gospel. Gospel means good news, and evangelical means one who proclaims the good news. So these are actually servants of God in the proclamation of the gospel. So that's kind of mind-blowing to people once they realize it. So there's a lot more we can draw from that, and we can discuss if you'd like.
Sure. I'd like to add before you dive into that, there is a mention of the Fated Sky in the previous module to this one. The Fated Sky was written by an actual historian. His name is Benson Bobrick. And he says, and I quote, "Astrology is the oldest of all occult sciences. It's also the origin of science itself, as astronomy, mathematics, and other disciplines arose to make possible the calculations to draw a horoscope." So I wanted to give that historical context, as this art of astrology has been practiced for 5,000 years.
Yeah, very important. In fact, kind of along those lines, it's important to know that Christianity itself, with its deep Jewish roots, was born out of what Karl Jaspers called the axial age, 800 BC to 300 BC, when pretty much all the major myth structures that function as our core religions today were born. And it's very important for Christians to be sort of grown up in how they read the text, because this was a text that that God gave to humans during that period. Well, we are not living in the axial age today. We're not living in what was then the Ptolemaic universe, a cosmology with heaven above, earth here, and hell below. We've welcomed Newton and Einstein. And so we have to grow up, and we have to understand our myth structure and how it helps us understand the world, and how other myth structures enrich that. So I think that's very important. And one of the factors in the scriptures is this concept of the East. So in the story of Adam and Eve, when the fall comes and they're barred from the garden, it says that they were sent east of Eden. And east of Eden, then throughout scripture, functions as a metaphor for being outside of the favor of God, being outside of blessing and goodness. And so when the Magi come from the east to welcome the Messiah, they're welcoming a new age, an age of inclusion, an age of peace, when that time, when some people will be outside and others are in, that's now going to be over. And the fact that Magi, astrologers, they're not reading they're not just coming at this from a Jewish perspective. In fact, they're coming from a very different perspective, but it leads them to the same truth, and that is a manger in Bethlehem, which is pretty amazing.
Lovely. Yeah, so for this particular passage, for those who want the Cliff Notes version of what I've highlighted here, the Magi did show up because of the star they had seen. King Herod intercepts them, requesting that he inform him where Jesus is at, because he wants to see this baby. He's going to worship him. So they check it out. They follow the star. They find him there. They're overwhelmed. They bow down and worship him. They give him the three gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But because they're warned in a dream, because they're intuitive, right? Their third eye is functioning. They say, all right, well, the dreams told us that we can't go back to Herod. It's going to be bad. So they use their both astrological and astronomical knowledge to leave the country by another route. So clearly they were very competent. And I also want to express too in this one, there is a difference between astrology and astronomy. And just because there's a difference doesn't mean that they cannot work together. So astrology is the study of the stars, the areas of life or the houses, and the planets and how they all interact together. It also is about pattern recognition, either in archetypes or types of people. And it's also tracking the activity in the stars. Astronomy also tracks the activity in the stars, but it's more scientific. So it's focusing on how far away the planets are from our planet, how far away stars are, how many light years, how many miles. It also has to do with a physical understanding of space. So obviously they did not have spaceships back then when Jesus was born, but either way, they are using mathematical calculations in addition to astrology. So it really is amazing how much these men were able to locate, the birth of Christ and then manage to escape without throwing Jesus under the bus as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this passage?
Yeah, no, just that maybe that verse there in verse 7, Herod called the Magi secretly. He was threatened. And in some ways, he was threatened by the Magi in the same way that Christians he was threatened by the Messiah in the same way that sometimes that Christians are threatened by astrologers and practices that they don't understand. But in fact, God used people who had these deep intuitions coming from this ancient wisdom tradition, not only to bring those gifts, which were actually very practical for this poor peasant family because they were going to need to exit and flee to Egypt, but to literally protect the Messiah and to protect his life from a hostile political threat in Herod. And to me, that's a tremendous but very very often overlooked fact in the nativity story.
So there you go. All right. So before we move on to the next passage, I'm just going to review some key takeaways. Magi is the root of the word magician. Magi traditionally translates to wise men. They are from the east, which refers to being from the east of Eden. The Magi were the first people to meet Jesus. And these wise men were clearly astrologers as they followed the stars to locate Christ, and they used their knowledge to skip town via an alternate route. So if you look here at the bottom of the slide, you will see our citation here, and you can click on it in the links below if you want to read it for yourself. All right. So we also decided to take a passage here from 1 Samuel's verses 3 through 22. And it is Saul and his encounter with the medium at Endor.
Yeah, actually, just a correction there. That's 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 3 to 22. So we'll maybe correct that for the link. Well, what's significant here is a couple things. One, this story does highlight the reality that the people of God were forbidden to consult mediums. And yet, the medium in this passage actually does the will of the divine. So there is this barrier, at least in the Old Testament, and yet it's not like the medium proves to be incompetent or incapable, or that her arts are insufficient, or that they are duplicitous or deceitful. They're actually truthful and expose Saul, who is supposed to be faithful to God, proves him to be the one who is deceitful. And it is the medium who has virtue and proves to be the honest broker of relationship with the divine. And then, therefore, what is significant back to the Magi is what was once forbidden is chosen to be key in the gospel story. Another very significant. Now, what I'm not suggesting is overturning 2,000 years of Orthodox Christianity and telling everybody in the church to get rid of their Christianity and go worship the stars or something like that. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, just as a grown-up, look at the text and see how these traditions and these wisdoms function, and then consider the significance that what once was forbidden is now key in the story that we Christians hold to be the dearest. That to me is what that is really ultimately saying, is that for a Christian, the whole world is yours. You may welcome anyone of goodwill to engage in what Jesus was all about: love, peace, a mission to include the weak, the marginalized, and to make a better world. And apparently, God has no problem engaging people from all kinds of traditions, including those once forbidden, in bringing about that better world that we seek as Christians.
So, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with this passage, the Cliff Notes version is that Samuel has passed, and Saul is desperate. There's a war going on, and Samuel's not there to help him. So, in the meantime, Saul had the brilliant idea to expel all the mediums and spiritualists from the land. But now that the Philistines are all up on him, he's like freaking out. He tried to talk to the Lord, but he's not getting any guidance. He tried to use other prophets, but nothing's coming through. Nothing is coming through the ether. There's no bridge between the living and the deceased. So he asks for his attendants. Where are there any mediums? Help me out. They direct him to Endor. He disguises himself in the dark of the night, shows up at her house, and he's like, hey, can you bring up this specific person for me? So she's like, well, I'm sure you know that Saul has, done away with all of us mediums, so I'm not going to do that. I don't want to die. He's like, don't worry about it. Just, can you please do it for me? And so she does anyway, brings up Samuel, and then they have a discourse. But in the middle of all that, she realizes, oh my gosh, you are Saul. Like, I don't want to die. And he's like, don't worry about it. I really need help. So you just do that for me, please. I appreciate it. Like, I'll spare your life, whatever. So again, the conversation goes on, and basically Samuel is like, you disturb me, man. This isn't cool. You're gonna basically join me tomorrow along with your sons, because maybe Don can extrapolate on this one a little bit more, but basically there is miscommunication here, and he's like, now I'm disturbed, I'm annoyed, and like, I'll see you tomorrow. And then Saul's freaked out. But in the end, the medium is the one that's like, okay, well, I did what you asked, and it's kind of embarrassing right now, so can you just please get up? I'll give you some food, you got to be on your way.
Yeah, well, Melanie, you're an astrologer, but I think you could be a preacher, because you just handled this text really well.
Thank you.
No, I think it's an incredible passage, and actually, what we didn't highlight, I really find maybe that just jumping out at me right now, is in verse 16. The Lord has done what he predicted through me. And the fact is that despite his duplicitous nature, his shame, his punishing of the mediums, his having to disguise himself, at the end of the day, God and the divine does what the divine is going to do through even something considered forbidden. And it turns out to be that the one who is faithful is the medium herself. And I think that's a beautiful twist on this passage. What a twist.
It is. So we have here some key takeaways, and I will have Don do the last one. But just for our general knowledge, especially for Christians that are astrology or medium or occult curious, as I say, I just want to clarify what a medium is. So they are basically, very simply, individuals that can communicate with the dead. Because they have this ability, it does not make them evil. As illustrated by Saul's desperation, mediums and other spiritualists do provide a much-needed bridge between the living and the dead. And as Don had mentioned before, though the Bible forbade God's people from consulting mediums, they nevertheless fulfill the purposes of God's plan. So maybe this is also a time for those that might have grown up in a very Christian environment, a very fundamentalist environment, where it's like one thing or the other, black or white, there's no nuance, whatever. Maybe the actual ability of mediumship, if it really truly was evil and the worst thing ever, would God even make that an ability for some people, first of all? Second of all, who do you think maybe was responsible for writing certain perspectives that we featured in the Bible? Maybe there might be a power play thing at that. It's also important to understand the historical context of the Bible, which is why I admire Don so much. Because he also understands like a historical context on how the Bible was written. And not everything in the Bible is meant to be taken literally. There's myth building, and that is also not only a more figurative way of learning our history, our ancestral history, but it's a just different way of learning facts. But it also opens up, myth building opens up the ability for you to discern what is true without everything being spoon-fed to you.
Awesome.
So,
Maybe this what I would end on is to my Christian brothers and sisters. We live in an extremely polarized world. And then because of that polarization, we can't address the big problems that would be related to Christian mission, wealth inequality, planetary degradation. And the reason that we are polarized is because of fear. And Christians should and have every reason to overcome fear, to look as grown-ups at the text itself and begin to open themselves up to wisdom and to enlightenment from any and every tradition that offers insight into how we should be going about uniting to tackle our problems. So I think overcoming fear, recognizing the role that God used in these traditions to guide his people, and even to protect the very life of the Messiah himself, and doing that through magi and astrologers and their intuitions and their arts. What might those intuitions and arts have to offer us today? I think Christians should welcome people of goodwill from these traditions as we proclaim Jesus as being the peace and hope for the world.
thank you very much, Don.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you for all those that have listened to this. I hope it has opened your mind to astrology and its relevance. I'm going to go with this next slide over here. This is ways that you can connect with Don. So you can find him here at his email address, don@justcapitalquotient.com. You can also find him at his website, Just Capital Quotient, and also LinkedIn. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Don?
No, just thank you. We enjoy working with businesses or individuals seeking their role in what we see as the new economy. And we welcome people of every tradition and every background who want to gather together in pursuit of that goal.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Don.
Thank you for having me.